The body no longer supported itself as it used to. There was no sharp pain, nor a specific point that could be pinpointed. It was something more diffuse. A weight spread throughout the limbs, as if each part had decided to give up silently, without warning the others. Standing required an effort that before came without thought. Now, it came late. Sometimes it didn't come at all. The cold didn't arrive in waves. It lingered, constant. It entered first through the hands, then settled in the chest, as if it had chosen to stay there. It wasn't possible to tell if it was morning or afternoon. The body no longer recognized time. It only recognized the cold, and the hunger, and the weariness that wouldn't go away even when doing nothing. Breathing was automatic, but laborious. Each breath seemed to ask permission from a body that no longer responded readily. There was no energy to straighten her back. Her posture became crooked, slumping. Her head tended to lower on its own, not by choice, but because keeping it upright required a strength that was no longer available. All around, the silence wasn't empty. It had form, it had weight, it was observed. The silence felt different when someone in uniform was nearby. Words weren't needed to assert themselves. Their presence was enough. The way their eyes lingered, attentive, waiting for something unspoken, was enough. The body perceived before the mind. It always perceived first. The tension came first in the shoulders, then in the stomach. A familiar tightness. Learned. There was no memory of when this fear began, only the certainty that it had been there for a long time. Perhaps since the moment it had learned that not reacting quickly enough had consequences. Standing still felt wrong, but moving seemed impossible. Between one thing and another, the body chose to stay still. Not out of courage, out of lack of choice. There was a clear feeling that something was about to happen. Not because someone had announced it, but because, in that place, nothing remained suspended for long without reason. The waiting was always laden with intention, and it almost never ended well. The mind tried to organize thoughts, but they scattered quickly. The effort to maintain a train of reasoning was almost as great as the physical exertion. All that remained was observation. The distant sound of footsteps, the rustling of the uniform fabric, a gaze that lingered too long. The body understood it as a warning. Even without words, it was a warning. There was an expectation of punishment, not for anything specific that had been done at that moment, but for the simple possibility of failure, of not living up to expectations, of not being able to bear one's own weight when required. Weakness, there, was never neutral. It always meant something. The silence stretched on. No one said anything, and yet, everything seemed already decided. Fear didn't arrive as a surprise. It already lived there. It didn't need to be called. It didn't need an explanation. All it took was for the body to fail even slightly more than was acceptable. And it would emerge in its entirety, taking over everything. Over time, she had learned that weakness was never just weakness. It always came with an interpretation, an evaluating gaze, a heavy silence, a tacit understanding that something was wrong, even when no one said what. The thin body, all too visible beneath the worn fabric, served as proof, not in favor, against. Each exposed bone seemed to speak for itself. It didn't matter what had been done before. It didn't matter how much resistance had been endured. The body in that state was enough to raise suspicion. And suspicion, there, was never harmless. There was a fear of not being believed. Not as an abstract idea, but as an automatic reaction. The body anticipated disbelief even before any words were spoken. He knew that explanations were rarely heard when they came from someone who could barely stand upright. The weakness made everything less reliable, even his own voice, when it existed. Speaking required energy. Holding eye contact required even more. Often, it was easier to remain silent than to try to convince someone of something their body seemed to deny. Silence, at least, didn't turn against you in the same way. Existing and occupying space had become a source of shame, not an explicit, declared shame, but the kind that slowly settles in. The shame of being seen, of being noticed, of being just another body in a place where bodies were counted, evaluated, reduced to their immediate usefulness. There were moments when simply being there felt like a mistake, as if the body were apologizing just for being there, breathing heavily, trembling slightly uncontrollably. None of this was planned. None of this was staged. It was simply what remained. At that point, fear no longer needed a direct threat. It functioned on its own, organized, silent, learned without class, without warning, without formal explanation. Learned because survival required learning. And the body, once again, understood before any articulated thought. The order came without preparation, short, direct. There was no raising of the tone, nor any abrupt gesture to accompany it. Precisely for that reason, it carried more weight. Simple words, spoken as if asking for something commonplace, something that should be done without difficulty. The body reacted with a delay, not out of defiance, not out of refusal. There was an immediate, almost automatic attempt to obey, like so many others before, but something didn't match the intention. The legs didn't respond at the same pace. The muscles seemed not to receive the signal. The effort was there, but it didn't produce enough movement. For a moment, he believed he could do it, that he just needed to try a little harder. The weight shifted forward, then back. The ground remained in the same place. The body, too. The sensation was of pushing something invisible, something that wouldn't budge. His gaze straight ahead didn't move. It remained fixed. There was no hurry in it, no visible impatience, just waiting, a firm, practiced waiting, as if time there had another function. The reaction was awaited, and the interval began to lengthen. Inside, certainty formed without needing words. Failure had a price. It always has. The reason didn't matter. The state of the body didn't matter. The result was what counted, and the result, at that moment, didn't yet exist. Her heart raced slightly, not from surprise, but from recognition. That feeling was already familiar. Her body failing under direct observation, the space shrinking, the silence growing heavier with each passing second without a proper response. The order was not repeated. This made everything worse. Repetition sometimes offered a chance. Its absence indicated that the situation was already being evaluated, and evaluations there rarely favored those who trembled. The body tried again. A minimal adjustment, a concentrated effort. Nothing changed significantly. Only the fatigue deepened, as if each attempt dug a little deeper into what was already at its limit. The mind followed, but did not lead. It merely observed its own body failing in real time, knowing that it would be seen, interpreted, recorded without words. There was no way to hide it. There was no way to explain it before something was demanded. The order remained suspended in the air, even after it had been spoken. It didn't need to be repeated to continue existing. It was there, present, waiting. Nothing happened immediately after that. And that was the hardest part. Time wasn't moving forward as usual. It stretched, thin and slow, as if it had been placed there only to test how much the body could endure remaining exposed. The inability to move was still visible, suspended in the air, without an immediate solution. No one intervened. No one spoke. Silence ceased to be absence and began to function as a response. There was no need for words. The assessment took place there, in that prolonged interval, while the body remained leaning too far forward, too rigid to fall, too weak to correct its own position. Each second seemed longer than the last. Her heart pounded at an unhelpful pace. Her breathing became shallow and controlled, as if any more obvious sign could be interpreted as something more than it already was. Her body tried not to draw attention, even though it was already the center of it. The anticipation of the worst didn't come as a clear thought. It came as a physical sensation. A tightness in the stomach, a strange warmth rising in the chest, despite the constant cold. The certainty that this silence was not neutral. Silences there rarely were. No words were exchanged, but much was said. The lingering gaze, the motionless posture, the lack of hurry. All of this communicated that there was enough time to decide what to do with someone who wasn't responding as expected. Inside, something was beginning to give way, not visibly. There were no tears, no sudden movements. It was a discreet, contained collapse, happening without drawing attention. A silent surrender of trying to control the outcome. The acceptance that, at that point, the body had already done all it could. The weariness deepened with the waiting. It wasn't just physical. It was the weariness of anticipating consequences, of mentally reviewing possibilities that never ended well, of remembering, without clear images, other moments when waiting had been followed by something definitive. The body trembled slightly now. Not enough to seem like an act, just enough to betray the effort of remaining there, supporting itself more out of habit than real strength. Each muscle seemed to operate at the minimum limit necessary to avoid collapsing completely. Nothing was happening, and that was the worst part. Because, in that suspended space, anything was still possible. It was there that something deviated from the expected path, not abruptly, not with a clear gesture that could be pointed out later. It was a change too small to be called an immediate decision, but big enough to break an old logic. For the first time, the body didn't try to go any further. There wasn't that automatic, almost desperate insistence on forcing what was already failing. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was closer to an interruption, as if something had silently recognized that exceeding that limit would lead nowhere. The logic he had learned dictated that insistence was mandatory, that obedience came before any physical consideration, that the body had no right to refuse. Even so, he remained. He did not advance. He did not correct his posture. He simply stayed, holding on to what remained. This seemed to cause unexpected discomfort on the other side. Not a visible, exaggerated discomfort, but something changed in the way their gaze was held. It was no longer just waiting. There was a brief, almost imperceptible shift, as if what was being seen didn't quite fit with what should be happening. The fragility there was too evident to be ignored. There was no mistaking it for acting. The subtle trembling, the difficulty in breathing deeply, the thin body supported more by habit than by real strength. Everything was exposed, defenseless. For a moment, it seemed that no one knew exactly how to react. The authority, which usually moved with clarity, encountered an obstacle that was neither open resistance nor effective obedience. It was simply a body on edge, too visible to be treated as an abstraction. There was a limit there, unspoken, unannounced, but present, a limit that wasn't part of the learned rules, and precisely for that reason it caused strangeness. The situation demanded a known response, but the scene didn't offer the usual fit. The silence lengthened again, but now it was different, less sharp, still tense, still heavy, but punctuated by something new. A brief hesitation, an interval in which the decision seemed suspended not by calculation, but by recognition. Nothing was declared, no explanation was given. Yet, something had changed direction, even if no one had named it. The gesture didn't come as an order, nor as a correction. It was too small to be called a decisive action, but clear enough to change everything around it. A minimal shift, a short step to the side, an open space where before there was nothing but expectation. There was no speech, no explanation to organize what was happening. The decision was made silently, as if it didn't need defending. The body in front wasn't pressured to continue. It wasn't pushed beyond the visible limit. It simply ceased to be demanded of. This interrupted something bigger than the moment. It interrupted the expected sequence. The automatic logic that dictated someone would always have to give in first. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't the weak body that had to adjust. The dignity there didn't come from explicit recognition. It came from the absence of insistence, from the fact that nobody tried to prove anything. Nobody demanded more effort to confirm what was already clear. The limit was accepted without being announced. The internal turmoil was immediate. There had been no preparation for that. The body remained tense, as if the threat was still unfolding. It took time to understand that the situation had changed, that what had been expected would not come in that way. When humanity appeared, it didn't bring immediate relief. It brought estrangement, an internal displacement difficult to organize. War had taught us to anticipate pain, punishment, correction. It hadn't taught us what to do when none of that happened. The small gesture remained greater than it seemed, not because it was heroic, but because it broke a continuity that was too long. A continuity in which bodies were pushed until they no longer responded. There, for the first time, something was interrupted before that, and the body, still trembling, still weak, realized that it didn't need to move for something to change. The body retained that moment in a specific way, not as an organized memory with a clear beginning and end, but as a sensation, as something that remained there, effortlessly accessible, whenever the cold returned with greater force or when the silence lingered too long. It wasn't the entire scene that was returning. It was the exact moment when nothing was demanded. The open space, the absence of pressure, the silent recognition of a limit that, until then, had never been considered valid. After that, the uniform no longer provoked exactly the same automatic reaction. The fear was still present, because it doesn't just disappear, but it came mixed with something else difficult to name. A subtle doubt. The awareness that not all authority figures responded in the same way. That, even there, something could deviate from the expected script. There was no feeling of victory, no broad relief, the kind that relaxes the whole body. The body remained weak, the cold remained constant. The war, in every possible sense, was still ongoing. None of that changed suddenly. What changed was more subtle. A realization that didn't require explanation. The certainty that, at that specific moment, something different happened. Not big enough to be recounted aloud, not clear enough to become a lesson. Humanity did not announce itself there. It did not need to be recognized as such. It simply passed through, briefly, contained, leaving a trail to faint to be followed, but strong enough to remain. The body moved on, carrying this with it, not as declared hope, not as consolation, simply as presence, something that once existed, and for that very reason, could not be completely forgotten. And that's how it stayed. Some people move on, others stay a little longer. The stories continue here for those who choose to stay.